Welcome back. You're here with Gold Bookworm. Today we're going to be talking about Robert Kiyosaki. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Is he legit? Should you be a fanboy? A simp? And typically there are two types of people when you bring up Kiyosaki. Either those who are behind him 100%, or the skeptics who will claim that his factory that he was supposedly in charge of some years back never did well, and he actually only made it because of the cash flow empire, because he was selling the aspirational idea, concept, notion, or dream of becoming rich. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I made the argument to this dude a couple months back, and he actually got offended because he's a big Kiyosaki guy. But over here, Tom Hopkins, he freely admits he was not good at selling, and then he said, I'm going to teach people how to sell. And that's what made him wealthy and famous. Just so you guys know, all the books I mentioned in this video, there will be links in the description if you want to check them out. It's a way to indirectly support the channel through affiliates. Otherwise, you can just buy them used or look at your library, because ultimately this is about education. That's why I do these segments. But with Kiyosaki, the core principle, and I remember as a kid, my dad had like 8 or 9 of his books. He made us listen to the audiobook where I believe there was the anecdote involving him and his friend melting down toothpaste caps to make a nickel. That was kind of cute. But essentially, the poor dad was the everyman middle-class guy who gets an education, secures a job, works 30 years, has his pension or his 401k. That's considered the way you want to be. And interestingly enough, that's the Ben Stein and Phil DeMuth argument in many respects, although they do believe in investing. But they say, great undergraduate, great graduate school, great job, and then you use all the money you make to do well in investing, which is actually quite valid. Because if you don't have much money to begin with, it is hard to get it rapidly, especially if you're going to invest in stocks. The rich dad, on the other hand, was the dude who has a business, buys assets, and invests in stocks and sees them appreciate over time instead of obsessing over just making a salary. And then, of course, you have the emphasis on, with a business, using it to basically have a tax shelter and write off expenses. A lot of truth to that, but you have to be careful, because if you're not running a legitimate business, and you just think you're going to have your business credit card and start paying for, your PS4, your Arby's meal, if you can't justify that, you will get in trouble with the government eventually. It's going to be legal, or it could be financial ramifications, so you have to be careful with that. Real estate in particular is more complicated than these marketers will tell you, because you have to buy in the right location, you have to make sure that you get a proper inspection done so that you're not dumping a bunch of money in for repairs, a lot of different factors. So yes, the LLC is a good idea, but you have to have a real business behind it, not just, I'm going to try to use a tax or use a business account to my benefit. At a certain point, though, I noticed my dad had taken all those books and donated them, and I said, well, why? He said, well, he realized Kiyosaki was copy-pasting huge chunks from his previous books into new versions, I guess just to lengthen them. And he's just repeating the same tripe. There's nothing new. Which, interestingly enough, in the book Midas Touch, Trump's side of it is really fascinating and more practical, and Kiyosaki is that kind of wowzers trousers. And indeed, he does copy-paste from his other books, if I remember correctly. Just like with this one. And it's a couple years back, I'm in a grocery store, this Indian dude approaches me, and he tries to get me involved in what sounded like a pyramid scheme, and yes, it was a pyramid scheme. So he said, let's meet at Starbucks. We meet. He pays for his own coffee, and he expected me to get my own, which is kind of weird for like a first business meeting, but just a little anecdote there. And then he gave me a PDF of this book, which is the same type of thing, very generic. Look at all these dynamic ideas of modern business and all these ways that people use technology to make money. But it's extremely broad and vague. So big picture is what you get with Kiyosaki. And it turns out that whole approach of the person giving you the free copy and trying to take you out for coffee That, from what I've seen on Goodreads, other people in the reviews were saying the exact same thing happened to them. So it must be some type of MLM, multi-level marketing campaign. And I think Kiyosaki was shilling for MLM. If not currently, some years back he was. So it all kind of fits together. Now, just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with big picture or selling an idea, and other people have done that. So, Guerrilla Mindset. On the cover, it mentions wealth. His section on investing was basically dollar cost average into index funds. No specifics on what to invest in or such. He had a little bit of mention of like specific retirement accounts, but is this Guerrilla Mindset? Is this something fantastic? And yet it seems to have sold pretty well. The Compound Effect, kind of short, relatively vague book. Good principles, but not much in terms of specifics. This is something I tried to do with my own book, or I guess the opposite. And with Total Invincibility, those who've read it can attest to this. I do mention some particular funds, ways to get started, not necessarily recommendations, but it gives you, okay, this is where I can begin my search, as opposed to, I don't know. And then you run the risk of getting ripped off, because if you look at a 401k at work, a lot of the default funds, the expense ratios are ridiculous. The management fees are crazy, especially bond funds. You're going to lose money if you invest in most bond funds provided by 401ks through employment. I'm also currently doing, kind of on a part-time basis, I'm doing it's like an ebook specifically focused mainly on stock investing, but also with home ownership, and I'm going to be including more examples there and charts of specific stocks over time, how they've done. So again, about giving you a sense not just of theory, but also how it works and where you can begin to do your research. Now, a book I'm definitely going to recommend. This is one that when I looked at the cover, I said, I'm not sure that's worthwhile, but it turns out it's excellent. How to Be a Capitalist Without Any Capital. He's a young guy, but he explains in detail where he bought the house, how much he paid for it, how much he charges in rent to ensure that he can cover and not lose money, his negotiations with the bank for loans, how he bought businesses, like reaching out online and saying, hey, I'd like to purchase your assets, what it comes down to. So this book is, imagine Kiyosaki, but step by step, or at least specific anecdotes of how it can be done. And that's why I highly recommend it. Again, all the books are going to be in the description if you want to check them out. Ultimately, this is what I would say with Kiyosaki. I know now he's been pushing, I think, gold and also Bitcoin. Look at him, read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I wouldn't go beyond that. It's good for a nice conception, a story, but as far as specifics, there's much better books out there. It's going to give you some inspiration for sure. And you have to respect him for what he's done. And if you can emulate what he's done with his self-help stuff, 100% do so. However, it must be noted that you're not going to learn how to be rich by reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You're going to get an idea of what, the broader concept. But that's about all. So if you have any questions or other topics you want to see covered, go ahead and drop them below.